Hi, I'm Brian, and I did my project over human rights in China. First of all, I'd like to talk about some of the history of China. The Republic of China was formed on March 12, 1912, where Sun Yat-sen of the Nationalist Party was made president, but soon after had to give that leadership position to Yuan Shikai. This is a little bit of a review of the last chapter that we did in the book. After Yuan died in 1916, Sun was able to rise back to power, where he joined forces with the Communist Party, but died of cancer in 1925. His successor, Zhang, cut ties with the Communist Party with the Shanghai Massacre, as he killed many of the Communist representatives and leaders. The Nationalist and Communist Party had many disputes and fought for power until the Communist Party had control of most of the country by 1949. Mao Zedong was the leader who helped the Communist Party rise to power as they pushed the Nationalist Party out and into Taiwan, where now they only have control of some of the islands off the coast. With control of the mainland of China, Mao formed the People's Republic of China in 1949. The People's Republic of China can also be known as the Communist China or Red China. In an effort to change the society from agrarian to communist, Mao pushed for a new plan known as the Great Leap Forward from 1958 to 1961. This ended tragically as millions of people died from starvation and more from being persecuted after being labeled as a counter-revolutionist, where they were labeled this because they owned a farm, a private farm, instead of a farm that was run by the government. Stepping back several years, Tibet had made themselves independent from the Chinese Empire in 1912 after the Dalai Lama had proclaimed them independent for religious reasons. Most of them were Buddhist during this time. After Mao had led the Communist Party into control in 1949, they put themselves in the Tibetan territory and suppressed any resistance. In 1951, Tibetan representatives met with the Chinese Communist government and formed the 17-point agreement, which made Tibet under China formally. This led to many disputes and rebellions that resulted in the Chinese military killing many of the rebels. Mao and the Communist Party kept suppressing human rights with the implementation of the Cultural Revolution that started in 1961 and lasted a decade. Around this time, the government enforced communism by taking out any form of capitalism or traditional views. Also, during this time, many more million people died as violence broke out into the country between things like factions and stuff. After Mao died in 1976, a group called the Gang of Four, which included Mao's wife, Zhang Qing, Zhang Shunqiu, Yao Wenyuan, and Wang Hongwen, were blamed for the chaos of society. The one-child policy, it was implemented in around 1979 and 1980, which allowed families to only have one child. In the mid-80s, they changed this so that those in rural areas could apply to have a second child if the first child was a girl or disabled. If you had multiple children, there actually was no penalty, but if you were to have a child after your firstborn, then you would receive a fine. The Constitution of 1982, it is the current version used in China, which with a few changes over the years through amendments. It forms China as a socialist state that is under a democratic dictatorship. In this Constitution, they also give rights such as freedom of speech, press, assembly, association, procession, and demonstration. This is different from earlier constitutions because they previously had the right to strike for workers and things. An amendment in 2004 showed some interest in the communist government for making changes in human rights to better it, as they say the state respects and protects human rights. The Tiananmen Square was the Chinese government's response to a 7-week protest, including hunger strikes made by civilians Most of these were university students. The students called for the government to be more accountable and for other issues like workers to be more in control of the industry. The government attempted to censor the event, which led to uncertain death tolls ranging from a few hundred to a few thousand. Some recent events. I had a conversation with a professor here at SNU that has been to China, and whenever I brought up the subject, one of the first things that she talked about was a movie that came out in 2012 called Back to 1942. It's sparking some interest in making several people, especially the younger generation, to think about what is going on over there. As I said, this movie was released in 2012, and it follows a disaster that took place in the Henan province as people were starving. The food supplies were being given to the Chinese soldiers during the war with Japan, and the government wasn't really doing anything to help the Henan area as so many were dying. Also, they were being raided, and which was all making them struggle even more as they had to fight off the raiders and figure out how to feed their families. This movie has caused many motivations for reform and made many of the younger generation realize the faults that the government may have. Also, there have been changes to the one-child policy. Issues have arisen with one-child policy, such as a massive difference in male-to-female ratio. I read where the male population by 2020 could be as many as 30 million more in China than the population of women. So over the past few years, there have been changes to the one-child policy to possibly help this. One change is that parents can have a second child if both spouses are the only child of their families. But the most recent change came in the fall of 2013, as it was changed to allow a second child if one of the spouses was an only child. Another issue that has been seen recently is executions. In 2006, the BBC reported that as many as 10,000 people are executed in China every year. And people are receiving the death penalty for murders and rapes without physical evidence and based purely on a confession. Many of these confessions are forcibly made by beating or in some other way of torturing the accused until they make a confession. In many cases, after they execute the person, another person will come out and confess that they actually committed the crime without any type of torture. Possible future for China. I said that it was hard to tell because of the communist background of China. It's hard to say what may happen for human rights in China in the future. I think that the Communist Party sees that there needs to be a change, but how willing they will be to make the necessary changes may vary. I also think that the one-child policy will be lessened even more eventually as immigration occurs more often, where these males that are overpopulated will actually leave the country to find a spouse. I think that the governmental violence will stay in place in some way as the communist government wants to keep a tight control over their people. And that is my project. Thank you.